making sure he knows. We're ready to go live. Excellent. Welcome to our candidate forum for seat number 5 for the Sunnyvale City Council. I'm Elaine Manley, and I'm from the League of Women Voters, and I'll be the moderator this evening. The League hosts forums like this to allow voters to hear the candidates and their views, to be able to get questions answered and learn more about how they would respond to different issues that they go through. Our goal is to enable voters to learn about the candidates so that they can make informed choices. And by the way, the League never supports or opposes any candidates or political parties. 4 of the 7 seats on the Sunnyvale City Council are up for election in November. Candidates must run for a particular seat, and all Sunnyvale voters get to vote for one candidate for each seat. We're conducting separate forums for each council seat, as I mentioned, and it's going to be over 2 nights. So tonight we have seat 5 and seat 7. On Monday night, we'll have seat 4 and seat 6. The forum for the 2 candidates for seat 5, we have Pat Meyering and Russ Melton. The candidates have agreed to the format and ground rules for this forum. I will be posing questions to them and designate response times. Some of them will be 90 seconds for beefier questions, 60 seconds for other questions, and every so often we've got a very short question for them. The timer is going to be seated in front. We actually have a team of timers. This is great. So they will be helping the candidates know how much time they have so they can pace their response and stop on time. Each candidate this time will have 30-second rebuttal cards that they may use to rebut remarks from the other candidate. They cannot use them for the opening statement or the closing questions, or for one other question that we gave them. But everything else, if something comes up that they would like to do a rebuttal card, they can use up to 2 of those cards. So the questions for this forum were developed by a team of League members based upon their own research, as well as questions that we received via email. We will not be taking questions from the audience this evening. This forum is being recorded and aired live on Sunnyvale's government channel. The ground rules ask the candidates to not use forum recordings for campaign purposes. We also encourage the audience to not record the forum because we want it to be shown in its entirety, and we will tell you how to access the forum video once tonight's event is over. Finally, we ask the audience to please refrain from displays of support or opposition. Please hold your applause until the end of the forum for each seat. Your speaking order, let's see here. Now we're going to turn our attention to the candidates. So thank you very much for running for office and for participating in this forum. Your speaking order for the opening question was determined by a random drawing, and we will start with Pat Meyering. So the question is, what are your qualifications and what motivates you to serve on the City Council?
Thank you all for coming. We owe a big debt of gratitude to the League of Women Voters because there's very little news coverage these days about local government, and there's very little time to do independent investigation. So these League of Women Voter forums, which are implemented by a huge number of volunteer hours, are a big service to the community. My name is Pat Meyering. I've been on the City Council for the last 4 years and 8 months. 3 themes have emerged from my time on the council. Revenue is up 50% since 2012 when I joined the council. It's up from $265 million to $399 million per year. So that's an increase of $134 million per year in additional revenue to the city. But the city still claimed, the council majority still approved selling parkland because they say that they needed the money. That doesn't really make any sense. Even going further, there's a tax measure on the ballot, the same ballot's coming out for November 8th, that's going to ask that you approve increasing your utility tax. There's a theme about members of this council majority taking money from companies that do business with the city, real estate developers, and then turning around and granting those developers deviations from the building plan so they can build wider for greater profit, but no corresponding increase in road capacity, schools, water supply, or parkland. There's also a $310 million pension fund shortfall, but the council has approved reneging on an agreement with the Superior Court to have the members of the city employees pay their share.
Thank you. Russ Melton?
Great. Thank you so very much, Elaine, and it's great to be here tonight. And I wanted to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for putting on tonight's event. It's wonderful to see everybody here, and I thought I would just start off by telling everybody a little bit about myself. I'm a 50-year-old father of two and a husband. My wife Sammy is here tonight. She works as a certified nursing assistant at a hospital in San Jose. I was born and raised in Palo Alto. I'm a local guy. When I was younger, I served in the United States Navy, and along the way, I got a degree from Santa Clara University. I worked for 15 years in the high-tech space at National Semiconductor Corporation, and in 2011, I decided to dedicate myself to public service. So I took off from National Semiconductor and went through the Leadership Sunnyvale program, and then was appointed by the City Council to serve on the Sunnyvale Planning Commission. And I really appreciate City Council's vote to put me on the Planning Commission. I've been there for 4 years, and I was selected 3 times by my colleagues to serve as chair of the Sunnyvale Planning Commission. I'm running because I think Sunnyvale is a great place to live, work, and do business, and I want to keep it that way and improve it for future generations. I also wanted to say thanks to the League of Women Voters. I got an email earlier today, and the gist was voters have a hard time penetrating the financial reports that candidates have to put out. So in the back, I put a listing. I'll just show this if I can as an example. This is every campaign contribution I've received since the beginning of my campaign. And on the back is every dollar that my campaign has spent in support of getting me elected. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. All right, so the next question, we will start with Russ. Measure M on the November ballot is a citizen initiative that seeks to protect Sunnyvale's public lands by requiring voter approval of some future land transactions. Regardless of how you feel about Measure M, what is your understanding of why Measure M got on the ballot, and what would you do to alleviate concerns that would lead people to feel they have to use the initiative process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I live near Rayner Park. I live so close to Rayner Park that when the Stratford School application came to the Planning Commission, I had to recuse. So I know what's going on at Rayner Park. This is my neighborhood. And I think that folks are upset with the perception that public lands have been sold and that park use that is available for everybody is now not being available for everybody. And there's a perception that City Council wasn't listening to folks when they came out and said that they didn't like this. So I think that's the genesis for Measure M being on the ballot. So when I'm out talking to people in the community, in my neighborhood and throughout Sunnyvale, even if I see a yes on Measure M sign in front of their house, I go and I listen to them, we talk, and I say, I understand where you're coming from. And even though we may have a political disagreement on what to do with Measure M, I say, I don't support Measure M. What I say is, I think you still need to vote for me, Russ Melton, for Sunnyvale City Council seat 5, because I know how to get things done. And what I want to do is aggregate land strategically for the benefit of the people of Sunnyvale. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Pat?
The origin of the citizen initiative was years of discussion by residents with the council members and a recognition by residents that these current members of the city council majority do not agree that they are public servants and they do what their residents tell them to do. And it was a glaring situation where land that was accumulated over years, including years of savings to purchase that land, is simply being thrown away and never going to be able to be recovered because the price of land is continually escalating. So thousands of residents contacted the council, literally, and hundreds came to council meetings and explained the facts of life, that this land was valuable and should not be sold. And one of the council members, Tara Martin-Milius, stated that residents are misguided. So in the face of direct orders from the residents, there was gross insubordination by the city council. One of the council members stated the residents would get at least 2 weeks notice before a final scheduled council meeting for a final vote. and that council member, Mr. Griffith, reneged on that. So residents observed that they were not being treated as the masters, and they took the initiative, and that's a huge project, and they were successful with that project, and that now appears on the ballot. It's a very moderate measure. It's called Measure M. That stands for Meaningful Government Reform, and it's going to safeguard the assets of Sunnyvale for future generations. It's very limiting with regard to only requiring 50% voter approval.
Thank you. Pat, you'll start with the next question. This one is also 90 seconds. Some mobile home parks in Sunnyvale and neighboring cities are being sold and redeveloped. Many people in remaining parks are seeing extraordinary rent increases that are causing them to face a new reality. They cannot afford to stay, but they have nowhere else to go. Do you think Sunnyvale mobile home owners should be protected from unaffordable rent increases? If so, how would you propose to do that?
The first thing to recognize is this is a council-created housing shortage. Over and over again, more than 100 times during my experience on the city council, the council majority has voted to approve deviations and special development permits and bonuses and rezoning for real estate developers to build larger than the plan allows. Just in the month of June 2016, the council majority approved 2 million additional square feet of office space at the north end of Matilda by 101. Mr. Melton voted to approve that on the Planning Commission, and there's no corresponding increase in roads or housing. And in fact, some of those computer companies give bonuses to their new employees who are frequently brought in from out of state if they live within 10 miles of work. So that places crushing pressure and imbalance in the supply and demand of housing. Many of the mobile home parks are located close to that corridor along 101, and these people are being forced out in their 80s. So it's a hassle to move at any age, and if you're in your 80s and you thought you were going to have some peace of mind, these people are getting a rude awakening. There's been 2 different proposals to close mobile home parks that have come before the city council for a vote. I voted no on both of them. Mr. Melton voted on the Planning Commission to approve both of those. So we need to have rationality in the city council decisions, and rent stabilization is something we should pursue. The council tried to deflect that by saying we'll study it possibly in 2017. I said let's implement an ordinance like Santa Clarita now.
Thank you. Russ.
Thank you. So here's our first opportunity where we need to correct the record. Patrick Myring just said that 2 mobile home closures came before the Planning Commission, and he says that I made a vote. It's not possible for me to have made a vote because neither of those items came before the Planning Commission. So this is just a factual piece of incorrect data that Patrick Myring here is trying to present to you, the voters. So we've had some ownership transitions in Sunnyvale of our mobile home parks, and this is important stuff. Folks at Plaza Del Rey find themselves with new corporate ownership of the Carlyle Group, and I think that mobile home park owners need to be protected. I think that we have a supply and demand imbalance of housing, and we need more housing in Sunnyvale, especially close to where people live and work, and we need more housing on transit corridors. It's as simple as that. So when I was a brand new planning commissioner back in 2012, we took a look at the ordinance in Sunnyvale to protect mobile home owners, and I voted in favor of that. And I think we can address the underlying issues by fixing the supply and demand imbalance of housing in Sunnyvale that's causing these issues in the first place. Thank you so very much.
Thank you. All right, Russ Melton, you'll be starting the next question. The mayor of Palo Alto recently made national news when he declared we're looking to increase the rate of housing growth, but decrease the rate of job growth. Palo Alto has already capped the growth of office space. Please explain why Sunnyvale should or should not adopt a similar job and housing development strategy. 90 seconds.
Thank you. So, Palo Alto's Mayor Burt, and as I mentioned earlier, Palo Alto is my hometown, so I pay attention to what's going on up there. He made some statements recently in the press when one of Palo Alto's planning commissioners resigned in frustration because she couldn't afford to live in Palo Alto anymore, and they had to move to Santa Cruz. And he made a bunch of statements that led me to believe that he thought that it was sort of Palo Alto's right to be the housing center of Silicon Valley. To be the employment center of Silicon Valley, and everybody else had to provide housing. I don't think that's right. I think that Sunnyvale, like I said, has a supply and demand imbalance. There's too much demand for housing and not enough supply, and we need to work on it. Here's another example. We have a new plan coming along for the El Camino corridor, and as one of your public officials on the Planning Commission, when we've been studying that, I said I was in favor of the maximum housing option. I think that's a good opportunity for housing. And then we have another alternative coming near the Lawrence train station. That's the Lawrence Station Area Plan, and I've been on the committee working on that proposal, and I think that's going to be a great opportunity for flexible mixed use of housing near work and near the train station. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat Myring.
So as was stated, the City Council majority has created this housing imbalance, created a housing shortage, and this is being used as an excuse to grant deviations to the housing developers, saying that since we now have a housing shortage, we must give deviations to the same donors that we took money from who build residential housing. If you look at some of the developments that Mr. Melton has approved on the Planning Commission, it's not ordinary housing, and it's not housing that would be attractive to most individuals, and it corresponds with his donations. One of these concerns the area that's north Sunnyvale along Duane Avenue and Devine between Wolf and Fair Oaks. It's commercial property that provided jobs for local residents, and it had a toxic waste problem underneath the soil. And the developer said we can make a lot of money having this rezoned for residential. So one of the donors to Mr. Melton's campaign sponsored this project, and they got approval from the Planning Commission, Mr. Melton voting for it, for 450 units at that particular site. Then that donor turned around and sold it to a Chinese company, which is now going to build that project, and they have a very different standard of environmental concern. Now, the list of donors that Mr. Melton has produced masks the name of that individual by calling it Manhattan Beach LLC, when it's actually Max Frank, the individual who was involved with this project at Devine Avenue and Duane Avenue.
Thank you. We have received our first rebuttal card, so you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, I voted in favor of 450 townhomes being developed during a housing shortage in Sunnyvale. I worked really hard on that to get to the bottom of the underground water contamination. I made the applicant prepare additional reports at great expense so that as your public official, I could be sure 100% that that's going to be great housing. And I think the applicant recognized several months later that I've done a great job on the Planning Commission and that they wanted to support me for Sunnyvale City Council.
Thank you. Our next question, Pat, you'll start. Now we'll turn to a quick question to address a common resident concern about changing building heights in Sunnyvale. You have just 30 seconds to respond. What is the maximum number of stories you would accept for any building in Sunnyvale, and why?
The answer depends on whether it's commercial or residential. There has been measures approved by Mr. Melton on the Planning Commission and the City Council majority to build higher. I think 2-story residential is the maximum that is normally acceptable in Sunnyvale, and 3- or 4-story commercial. Mr. Melton supported this measure where solar access was going to be revised so people that are living on the ground floor unit in a neighboring structure would never have any sunlight the entire year during any portion of the day. This is the condescension towards Sunnyvale residents.
Thank you. Russ?
Yeah, thank you. What Patrick says about solar access has nothing to do with what we're talking about here. I will say for residential, I generally support 4 stories on multi-unit residential projects, and I'm fighting hard on the Butcher's development application to make sure it's not higher than that. And in general, where we can handle higher development heights, I'm in favor of 7 stories in Moffett Park.
Thank you. The next question will start with Russ Melton. Butcher's Corner is a property of about 5 acres near the intersection of El Camino, Wolf, and Fremont. Setting aside the current development proposal, what would you like to see happen on the Butcher's Corner property? 90 seconds.
Thank you. So I have a lot of experience as a public official in Sunnyvale, as a planning commissioner, working on the Butcher's Corner application. When the environmental impact report came to the planning commission, I said no dice. I said the arborist report is insufficient and we need to take a look at every tree at Butcher's Corner, not just the non-orchard trees. And I said we need to redo the traffic report because it was insufficient and didn't account for numerous other new projects coming down the pipe in the area. The applicant has come to the Planning Commission twice now with his draft proposals, and I've looked him in the eye and I've said twice, don't come to the Planning Commission with something that is beyond what's allowed in the municipal code. Don't come to us with something that's got too much density or too much height. And the final thing that I'll mention is with the new El Camino plan that's coming down, I've said to city staff, I don't want a rezoning of that parcel from R3 to R4 that would allow additional density after the fact. So these are the things that I'm doing, and in response to Elaine's question, I think we can end up with a good project at Butcher's Corner that looks nice. Got to tackle traffic, got to tackle the intersection, but I think we can end up with a good project there.
Thank you. Pat Meyering.
Yeah, the origin of the Butcher Corner question is illustrative of what happens on Sunnyvale City Council. That particular land at the corner of El Camino and Wolf and Fremont Avenue was not within the city jurisdiction, it was within the county jurisdiction. The developer went to the county with this proposal for high-density housing, and the county said this is zoned agricultural, 2 residential structures maximum. So then the developer came to the people to whom he had given money in Sunnyvale and said, I'd like you to annex it. And the city council majority voted to annex it, which had no benefit to Sunnyvale residents whatsoever. So Mr. Melton stated he looked the developer in the eye. He also looked the developer in the eye when he took his check. So that's a conflict of interest, and it's skewing the decisions that are being made by Sunnyvale city government. Mr. Melton says he's going to tackle traffic. That's not going to be difficult. Traffic's at a standstill there, so he can tackle any automobile he wants. There's no way that anything more than 2 residential structures should be put in that area because the traffic is overwhelming. When that traffic is in gridlock, that's expelling auto emissions, and that's blowing over residential neighborhoods. And most of these council majorities are dying to tell you how environmentally conscious they are, and their votes are exactly the opposite. It's worsening the air in Sunnyvale. With regard to solar access having nothing to do with building heights, that's inconsistent with reality. That individual who's developing Butcher's Corner is already going up to 130 feet in the air. It's already been decided, and it's going to impact solar access.
Thank you. Pat, you'll be doing the next question. Traffic continues to be a top concern of Sunnyvale residents. What proposals do you have to lessen this problem, both in the short term and the long term?
The traffic problem can be addressed quite quickly if the city council majority and the planning commissioners were willing to stand up for residents. A good example is along Wolf Road, where Apple Corporation put in a campus down by Homestead and Wolf, and also putting in the campus up by Wolf and Arquez across from the Lowe's hardware store. They needed special deviations that Mr. Melton voted for repeatedly, and they got those special deviations from the city council majority. And Sunnyvale could have said, no more deviations, you're going to stick to the building limits unless you provide a park and ride lot for the public to use at both of your campuses at each end of Wolf Road, and a free shuttle bus 20 minutes during the commute hour and once an hour during the rest of the day. So Sunnyvale did none of that. Mountain View regularly puts the pressure on corporations to provide a community shuttle. Right now, today, Mountain View has 3 different community shuttles crisscrossing that city and allowing residents to leave their cars behind and get to where they want to go. So we have a situation where the council is not standing up to the real estate developers. Mr. Melton talked about his list of donors, and he broke down a $5,000 contribution from the developer of Wolf and Arquez into 5 separate contributions using fictitious business names that requires the reader to contact the Secretary of State and say, what is Borregas Partners, LLC? What is Santa Ana Court Partners, LLC? 5 different names. Secretary of State of California says it all goes back to Land Bank and Scott Jacob.
Thank you. Russ?
Thank you. Well, you know, this is just what the San Jose Mercury News calls as falsehoods and half-truths from Patrick Meyering. Yes, I've accepted a $5,000 contribution after the project was underway from the developer after he sold the project to another entity. My reports are accurate and complete. I mentioned that I think that housing is a function of supply and demand, and when there's an imbalance, people have to go great distances, and often this is by car. I think that by implementing the downtown plan that's underway, and by implementing the Lawrence Station area plan, we get people closer to transit and where they work, and I think that's important. I hope we talk about the downtown specific plan a little bit more in a subsequent question. I think with the adoption of the Peary Park specific plan, we're going to get a shuttle underway, and I want to support that and make sure that it's viable and successful. And if it is, we need to expand it so that it goes up into Moffett Park and it comes all the way to downtown. We have new numbered bike routes in Sunnyvale, and I think that's important. And if I'm elected to city council, I want to spend the first year working with the folks on our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission to continue the great work that they're doing and move things forward. Finally, I just want to say I believe in a simple plan for decarbonization. It's a 2-part thing. Step number 1, clean up electricity. Step number 2, electrify everything. It's that simple.
Thank you. All right, so Russ Milton, you'll do this next question, and we're going to turn to a set of questions on campaign finance. So you'll have just 15 seconds to answer this first part. How much money are you planning to spend to win this election, and who are your top 2 donors?
Thank you. It's all right here. So in support of my campaign to elect Russ Melton to Sunnyvale City Council, to date I've received $61,645. I've spent $40,781, and as of last night, I've got $20,862.
Thank you. Pat Meyering.
I've received $1,300. $1,200 is from my own bank account, and $100 was from a Sunnyvale retiree. And if you look at those statements from Mr. Melton, he has a $4,000 contribution from Stonehill Capital Management. That's a New York City hedge fund. In order to get hedge fund money, you have to submit a business plan.
Thank you. Pat Meyering. Some voters look to campaign donations as an indication that a candidate has community support. In 45 seconds, please tell us how else you can demonstrate community support for your candidacy.
I think that's an excellent observation that donations do demonstrate community support. The residential and commercial building community supports Mr. Melton enthusiastically and with great vehemence. So that's an important observation that every voter should make. Community support comes from people that also hand out flyers or send flyers by email or talk to their neighbors or talk about issues online. So this is a skewed idea that if somebody stands up like Mr. Melton and says they have $60,000 so far for the campaign for Sunnyvale City Council, including $4,000 from a New York hedge fund, which makes money for their investors by building residential developments, and to which he had to submit a business plan showing how their contribution to him would make money, that's a poor way for an organization to make decisions.
Thank you. Now, Russ Melton, we'll have a different question for you. 45 seconds as well. Some voters are concerned about the potential for undue influence from campaign donations, particularly from developers. Your campaign filings indicate that a majority of your 2016 contributions are from real estate-related donors. How can you satisfy Sunnyvale voters that your council decisions will not be influenced by your campaign contributors?
Thank you. The first thing I wanted to do is I wanted to say thank you to the nearly 100 individuals in Sunnyvale and in our community who have made a contribution to my campaign for City Council. These are folks that recognize that I'm a great candidate for City Council Seat 5 and that we need to make a change. That's 100 people who've reached into their pocketbooks and provided funds to support my campaign. I would say I've got a great amount of volunteers, but the question is not an abstract one when it comes to the organizational contributions that I've received. Like I said, I'm a graduate of Santa Clara University. This is a Jesuit university that has a strong focus on ethics in its curriculum. I've taken a campaign ethics course back at Santa Clara University. And whether I'm talking to a organizational contributor or to an individual contributor, I look everybody in the eye and I say that campaigning and finances has nothing to do with policy. Thank you.
Time, yes, rebuttal, 30 seconds.
Okay, well, one of the examples of Mr. Melton's taking of money involves a property that is right on El Camino, about a block and a half from here, called Las Palmas Development. And in that situation, there was an agreement with the developer that he was going to put in a pedestrian access that would allow people to walk from that landlocked development over to Cherry Hill shopping strip mall. Subsequent to agreeing to that and putting up the development, the developer came before the Planning Commission and says, I want to renege on this. I don't want to have to put in a pedestrian break in the wall and a ramp for people to walk over there. So Mr. Melton was the only one, after taking money from that corporation, to say, that's a good idea, we need to renege.
Thank you. All right, so for our next question, we will start with Russ Melton. Sunnyvale had a history of strong fiscal management based in part on its long-term planning and budgeting practices. However, in recent years, discussions on financing major capital projects such as the Civic Center have centered on voter bond proposals or transactions of city-owned lands. Do you think there has been a shift away from long-range planning toward short-term thinking within city decision-making? And would you support incorporating all future capital projects into the city's 20-year budgeting plan? You have 90 seconds.
Thanks. Yes, I would support incorporating the city's long-term capital budgets into our 20-year plan. I think Sunnyvale has a well-deserved reputation for strong financial management. We've got some work to do on important issues, but I think the city overall is doing a good job. So when it comes to the Civic Center, I'd have to say I absolutely do not support leasing any of the Civic Center land. I absolutely do not support selling any of the Civic Center land. I think there have been some discussions about possibly floating a bond so that we can revitalize these buildings. The building that we're sitting in right now, you all can make your own judgments about whether this building is sufficient for a modern community and getting things done as a municipality. I've invited folks to join me when I have to file campaign finance filing reports with the city clerk's office right over there in what they call the rabbit hutches, these old buildings that need to be revitalized. So I'm eager to see a plan for revitalizing the Civic Center and where those funds could come from, but I don't support selling off land and I don't support leasing it. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat Myring.
Yeah, the comment about revitalization and going from that with a implicit assumption that the only way to revitalize is by tearing down and rebuilding has no factual or logical basis. Many people in Sunnyvale live in homes that are more than 60 years old, and they revitalize by doing remodeling. So the question is about the strong financial management. That is a historical fact that does not exist currently. $134 million additional revenue now than we had when I started on the council in 2012. That would have been enough to build a brand new civic center. So where has that money gone? When I've been on the council, I've asked for copies of bills, and the first time I asked, I was given a copy of the bill. It showed $555 per hour for attorneys, including driving time from San Francisco for 2 attorneys to Sunnyvale. I started complaining about that. They said no more copies. So that's a situation where an elected official is being blocked from finding out what's really going on. There's no reason to sell any land that is very foolish financially because the land goes up in value. There's no reason to tear down City Hall. That's an environmental disaster. It should be remodeled. It should be revitalized. There should be a list of the top 4 or 5 things that need to be done per year. The short-term thinking is being exacerbated by the city manager who was dismissed from employment in Oakland and demands a brand new office building for her corner office. That's a situation that is totally out of control. The financial management is only going to come about in a logical way if there's more transparency. I've asked for copies of contingency fund expenditures and been denied.
Thank you. Pat, you'll be starting with the next question. On most matters that come before the City Council, there is a variety of viewpoints in the community and among council members. Could you give an example from your life where you were part of a group with diverse opinions and you helped resolve disagreements to arrive at an outcome acceptable to all?
There's many examples in life where you're dealing with individuals who are operating in good faith and want to come to a compromise situation. That doesn't exist on the Sunnyvale City Council with regard to their demands, and their demands based on what their donors are demanding are intransigent. There can't be any changes made. Even with regard to this project where Mr. Melton got $5,000 and spread it among 5 different fictitious businesses, the land bank project up at Wolf and Arquez, there was a commissioner who said, I amend the motion to require the developer to preserve 130 of the heritage trees. And Mr. Melton had an argument there on the Planning Commission saying that that's going to impair the developer's building. We can't have him preserve 130 heritage trees. So Mr. Melton referred to the San Jose Mercury News, which regularly endorses people like George Shirakawa and Leland Yee, who've gone to prison. That individual does not invite me for an interview, and they don't live or work in Sunnyvale.
Time. Thank you. Russ Melton.
Thank you. That was a complete non-response from Patrick Myring about bringing people together. I don't think he has a lot of examples of bringing people together. So I was fortunate to have been selected 3 times by my colleagues as chair of the Planning Commission. And that's just an exercise in itself of bringing people together and running a smooth public hearing. Over 75 public hearings I've run as chair of the Planning Commission. 7 commissioners coming together, city staff, applicants, members of the public in smooth public hearings at the Planning Commission. I also just wanted to mention, Patrick Myring has a lot of passion about this topic of campaign contributions. He's so passionate. A couple of years ago, he referred to City Council as a brothel. And then he followed that up by saying in the Mercury, he said, and this is verbatim, he said, when you take money and then turn around and do the desired act, that's what happens at a brothel. So women of Sunnyvale, I invite you to join my wife, Sammy, in saying that Patrick's comments are misogynist and unacceptable, and we're making a change in seat 5. And men of Sunnyvale, if you have a mother, sister, wife, or daughter, I join you in asking me to say that these comments are unacceptable and it's time for a change in seat 5.
Okay, so, rebuttal, absolutely, 30 seconds.
Everyone's invited to read the letter from the mayor who's best friends with Mr. Melton. Mr. Griffith and Mr. Melton are each other's best friends. June 13th, 2014, 3-page document, official city document. You can get it from the clerk's office, outlining Mr. Melton's poor performance on the Planning Commission with regard to bringing people together, talking about how Mr. Melton has failed to understand and interpret existing city policy and the general plan. This is where Mr. Melton said the developer wasn't building enough, and the residents said he was building too much. The mayor states that Mr. Melton failed in his duties and sacrificed the good of the neighborhood.
Thank you. Now we'll turn, and we will start with Russ Melton. We will turn to a question that we gave to the candidates in advance to provide them an opportunity to address something we did not ask. So, Russ, you'll be the first to respond. Would you please state and answer a question you wish you had been asked? You have the penultimate question. Yes.
Yeah, the penultimate question. Yeah, I didn't come with the penultimate question prepared. I'll just go ahead and I'll just go ahead and say that it's an honor to be here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, and say thank you again to the League of Women Voters and for everybody for coming here tonight to see the 2 candidates. I think you've got a clear choice for Sunnyvale City Council seat 5, and I'm going to ask you to vote for me, Russ Melton. Thank you.
Thank you. Pat.
My question is the truth being told in the campaign for seat 5 on the Sunnyvale City Council? And my answer is that with regard to Mr. Melton, he interviewed for a seat on the Planning Commission in 2012. He stated during that interview that his last employment was doing paperwork for a local credit union, and that ended in 2011 when he was dismissed from that job due to a difference of opinion about his performance. Mr. Melton is required to fill out State of California Fair Political Practices Commission forms stating what his job is and who his employer is. He states he's a manager, but he doesn't state who his employer is. There's a concern about the situation where Mr. Melton bought a home in 2015, 1 year ago, but he will not state who his employer is, and it's a $1.4 million house. The monthly payments and the property taxes needed to pay for that would require 2 high earners to make those payments, but he doesn't state who his employer is, and there's a concern among residents that he's actually an employee of one of the real estate developers.
Thank you. I think you've already done 2. You didn't? Okay, I apologize. 30 seconds.
Yeah, so there's a great American hero. His name is Joseph Nye Welch. He was chief counsel for the United States Army while it was under investigation for communist activities by Senator Joseph McCarthy's Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. What needs to be said here is, God in heaven, it will do neither you nor your cause any good. I will not discuss it any further. You've done enough. Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you no sense of decency? Ladies and gentlemen, I bought my house earlier this year. I'm proud to be able to do that and to live in Sunnyvale. The letter that I got from Jim Griffith while I was chair of the Planning Commission was accurate. We made a mistake on the Planning Commission, and I acknowledge that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so it's now time for a closing question. Pat, you'll be the first to respond. Why should voters choose you to serve on the City Council?
Yeah, I've done a diligent and conscientious job over 4.5 years, actually telling the truth and trying to get more visibility about what's happening in city government, how it happens, and what the results are. And I'm going to continue to do that no matter what price the self-described political elite try to extract. With regard to Mr. Melton's house purchase, he put down on the deed that he was an unmarried man. When you have a deed prepared, you have 3 choices. You can say you're married, property is separate. You can say you're married, property is joint, or you can say that you're unmarried. Mr. Melton marked the deed that he's unmarried. That blocks a spouse from having any role in a situation where
this is enough.
So this is the typical way that the Sunnyvale political elite tried to block any discussion of the real issues. So when you eliminate your spouse from the deed, that prevents that person from having any consent in the sale or encumbering of that property or sharing in the proceeds. So this type of character trait will bleed over to council actions. And when there's an accusation of misogyny, people should lean in and listen up, because Melton knows about misogyny.
Time. All right. Russ Melton, why should voters choose you to serve on the City Council?
Hey, I'm running for Sunnyvale City Council seat number 5 because I think Sunnyvale is a great place to live and work and do business, and I want to keep it that way, and I want to improve it for future generations. The big 3 things that I want to work on are housing and traffic and the downtown. I love Sunnyvale. I'm raising my 2 kids here. My wife, Sammy, and we got married in May. I put that on Facebook, and the person who officiated my wedding was Joe Simidian, and that's a county supervisor. It was a real honor. So Patrick Meyering is just dealing in more half-truths and personal attacks that I think is totally unbecoming, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Please join me in a round of applause to thank the candidates for participating tonight. So we have asked the candidates to remain after tonight's forum so that you can speak with them individually and ask your questions. You can also pick up their literature at the table. We'll have seat 5 on that side, seat 7 on that side. Tonight's video will be made available on our website, which is lwvcs.org. That stands for League of Women Voters, Cupertino, Sunnyvale. So lwvcs.org. We should have it posted within the next few days. Please share those links with your friends. I encourage you also to consider using votersedge.org. It's an excellent website that the League has pulled together a lot of election information on both candidates as well as ballot measures and the money behind both. There will be, by the way, there will be more information being added literally every day in Voters Edge, so it's something that you'll want to refer back to periodically. Thank you so much for coming tonight. Remember to cast your vote on November 8th. We will adjourn and bring the other group together probably in the next 5 to 10 minutes. Thank you.